This morning was devoted to the challenges faced by immigrants in communities in Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky, and to mobilizing those communities. And really that's what the afternoon is going to be about as well. And of course we heard all of these terrifically inspiring, moving stories and models this morning. But this panel is a little bit different. What this panel does is it seeks to lift up important tools and models from a national and regional perspective that might strengthen whole of community responses. That's what we're trying to do right now. And on that score, we have a really superb panel. Melissa Bertolo, to my immediate left, is going to start us off. And Melissa was the program coordinator for the Welcome Dayton program. And she now occupies a leadership position with Welcoming America, where she evaluates, and I think less often actually certifies, communities against standards established by Welcoming America on what makes a welcoming community. Bob Warren is going to be next, and Bob is a senior fellow at the Center for Migration Studies. He's a former demographer at the U.S. Census Bureau, and he's the former director of the Statistics Division at the old Immigration and Naturalization Service. And Bob has produced for CMS these very geographically precise and detailed estimates on the U.S. undocumented population, on permanent residents who are eligible for citizenship based on their years in the country, on DREAM Act eligible people, on the DACA eligible, and most recently on refugees. And he's going to speak about this very important resource for community organizing, advocacy, and service delivery. Jean Atkinson, to my left, of course, and to the right of Bob, is the executive director of the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, also known as CLINIC, which is a national legal support agency for immigrants. Jean also co-chairs the Committee for Immigration Reform Implementation, and she co-founded the CARA Family Detention Pro Bono Representation Project, which provides volunteer legal representation and advocacy to mothers and children in the Dilley and Karnes City detention centers in Texas. And she's going to speak about the need for massive legal screening of the undocumented, many of who, as it turns out, actually qualify for legal status. And last, but definitely not least, will be Jessica Garcia, to the far left, and she's the Deputy Political Director for the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union of United Food and Commercial Workers, so UFCW. UFCW meatpacking plant workers, as well as other workers, of course, have been targeted in raids and worksite actions in recent months. And Jessica will be speaking about the very impressive regional and community responses to these actions. We're going to try to leave a lot of time at the end of this to engage with you all. You can provide us with different models, tools, and resources, and of course questions as well. But each of the speakers, we've asked them to speak for about 10 to 12 minutes, and again, that will leave time for dialogue and questions at the end. So Melissa, if you could start off, we'd appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And again, my name is Melissa Bertolo, and I am the Certified Welcoming Manager with Welcoming America. And as Don mentioned, previous to working with Welcoming America, I worked for the City of Dayton as the Welcome Dayton Coordinator. So I'm really excited to see so many people here from Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, and that our states are addressing this really important topic. And so just thank you all for coming, and also thank you for the Center for Migration Studies for the invitation today to speak. So first, a little bit about Welcoming America for those of you that might not be familiar with the organization. We are a national nonprofit organization actually based in Decatur, Georgia, but I continue to live and work in Dayton, Ohio. And we are an organization that's really focused on building welcoming and inclusive communities, and we primarily do this through networks, through working with local nonprofit organizations as well as local governments. We have a Welcoming Cities and Counties network, really focusing on that government piece as well as the support that nonprofits can provide as well. We currently have over 180 different members working in approximately over 500 communities. So our statistic right now is that 1 in 7 people in the United States actually lives in a welcoming community. And so if you would like to learn more about Welcoming America, please visit our website, welcomingamerica.org, or I'll be around for today and tomorrow as well, and I'd be happy to share information. But today I'm really here to share information about a new program that we have called Certified Welcoming and our standard that was developed, which is available out on the information table. So this is really what I'm here to talk about, and really excited about it. It was just released in 2017 after an 18-month process to develop and really help define what does it mean to be a welcoming community, to really provide some benchmarks and broad policies and programs that we need to have in place in order to really demonstrate what it means to be a welcoming community. Particularly, we have more and more places say that they're welcoming, but what does that actually mean beyond verbiage, and to be able to hold places accountable in their action and deed. So the welcoming standard, I want to share kind of two different major components of it. The first are the core strategies that we have, and I think that they're really important for understanding how do we go about this work that we're doing to create welcoming communities at a local level. So there's 4 different core strategies that are encompassed in the welcoming standard. The first is building connections between newcomers and longer-term residents. And so our major idea with Welcoming America is that as we have a garden, you can have a seed that needs to be planted, but that seed's not going to grow unless there's fertile soil. And so really about working those relationships between newcomers and longer-term residents, so making sure that there's that fertile soil. So that's one of the main strategies that's included in the welcoming standard. A second one is about evaluation, monitoring impact, which I'm sure Center for Migration Studies is excited to hear about. But recognizing that we need to continue to evaluate the work that we're doing, making sure that we're on target. And so what are those processes in place that we have? A third strategy is designing for equity and inclusion. So really thinking about things like equitable access, understanding how to ensure that we have participation across sectors. At the beginning of the conference today, we talked about who's at the table, who's been invited. And it's not just about that invitation either, right? So really making sure that all people are involved and engaged in the work. So that's a third component. And then the last one is partnering across sectors. So really looking at that partnership as being collaborative and engaging multiple stakeholders. And I think that's really an important concept with the welcoming standard, especially as I move into the second area, as far as our framework areas. And so really understanding that the welcoming standard is a collective impact model, and while we're certifying governments, the whole of community, like with the theme of the conference today, is really required. So while we can't just have a certification for a local government, we actually need to have all of these different components and sectors and stakeholders involved. So specifically for that, as I talk about the other major component of the standard, it's the 7 framework areas that we have. So I'm going to run through these, and again, encourage you to pick up a copy of the standard, or you can download it on our website. But those are government leadership. So what is the government doing, both in its voice and policy, but also in its engagement. We have equitable access, so how do we ensure that community services are accessible? Is it language access, policies and programs, civic engagement? Again, so really looking at that representation and full participation in civic life. We have connected communities again, which is, again, part of that aspect of our strategy, but really building those relationships between newcomers and longer-term residents. Education is another framework area, so looking at both K through 12 as well as adult ed and beyond, to make sure that students have the support that they need to succeed in school. Economic development, and I think this is one that especially a lot of communities in our states have really found the economic impact of our immigrant and refugee communities, to really demonstrate the power of being a welcoming and inclusive community by that economic development piece. So what are we doing to make sure that we're able to harness the full potential of all of our residents? And then safe communities, so fostering trust building relationships between residents. So each of these framework areas have specific criteria that are attached to them that you can look at as far as, if you're looking at what does it mean to be a welcoming community. These are some of the best practice guidelines that we have worked with experts across the country to really try to put some definition and provide a framework and an on-ramp to creating more welcoming and inclusive communities. So that's just a little bit about the standard, and I'll briefly speak about the certification program as well if you're interested in that. So certified welcoming is really a designation that is given to those communities that are reaching this core of the welcoming standard, and we're able to really solidly say that they are meeting it. So it's through a self-assessment process as well as an in-person audit where we evaluate and compare the work that's happening in the community against the welcoming standard. At this point, we have 3 places that have become certified. So Dayton, Ohio, my hometown. We have Louisville, Kentucky, and I know that there's lots of folks from Louisville in the room, so big shout out to all of you. And then Salt Lake County as well. So those are the 3 that have become certified. And it's a brand new program, again, that was just launched last year. And then we have a lot of places that are in the process as well. And I'm really pleased to say that we have a lot of people who are interested in this program, specifically from these states that we're here today. So specifically, we have Toledo, Ohio, and Lucas County that are in the process of becoming certified. We have Boise, Idaho, Chula Vista, California, Pittsburgh, and Washtenaw County, Michigan. So I encourage you to look more into it if you're interested. And specifically, I think that the standard itself can be applied in different types of environments. While it's specifically geared towards a community as a whole, it could be used with a lens for universities, for educational institutions, for employers, et cetera. So really thinking about it with a lens to apply in different environments.
Thank you. Bob, do you want to?
Sure. Mostly my presentation is going to be a PowerPoint presentation, and I hope that you can see the screen. Actually, I can't see it. Because I just had cataract surgery, and I haven't gotten my prescription yet. So, I think you'll be able to see what's on the screen. But I'm going to go through and I'm going to tell you what to look for on the screen. But my plan when I started here was to tell you a kind of a heart-rending story of how I got involved with this. I grew up poor on the west side of Indianapolis, and about 50 years ago, I went off to play professional baseball, and my second year didn't go so well. So I ended up being recruited by the Census Bureau, and I went to the Immigration Service, and on and on and on. And I learned how to make estimates of the undocumented population. Years went by, and I finally, working with CMS, figured out how to make estimates down to small geographic areas, which is what I'm going to talk about today. And I went back to Indianapolis to live. I was invited by the Senate committee and by the Indiana Senate to come and testify 2 years ago. And in preparing for that, I found out that the area that I grew up in had the largest concentration of undocumented immigrants in Indiana. So, but that was a story I was going to tell you, but I decided not to. And I was going to go into a whole elaboration. But when we had, in a session this morning, we had to talk to the person next to us and get to know them and exchange information. And this is Joanne's fault, by the way. So we were talking, and we were talking about how it's hard to get information out to the world. And it's been a lot harder for me to get information out to the world than to make these estimates. And what I was saying to her was that my next door neighbor's daughter is a big Trump supporter. And I was talking to her a few weeks ago, and her big issue was immigration. Build that wall and all that stuff. And So I said to her, okay, I want to tell you 3 facts that are well supported by the data. These are true. Since 2000, the number coming across the southern border illegally has dropped by 80%. In the last 10 years, the undocumented population has dropped by 1 million. And in the last 10 years, 2/3 of the undocumented immigrants arriving in this country have been on an airplane. I actually don't have any finish for that story, but I want you to blame Joanne for that. But what I'm going to tell you about today is something that I hope is very practical for everybody. Everybody in this room, I hope, will be able to use the information I'm going to give you. I'm going to be talking about the population that's eligible to naturalize, and I'll define that later, but, and also the undocumented population. Until about 5 years ago, there were no estimates of undocumented immigrants below the state level. We had estimates for every state, but nothing at the local level. So CMS organized a meeting about 4 or 5 years ago, and the result of that meeting essentially is what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So I'm going to be showing you actually slides with numbers on them, and we're going to start at the national level, and we're going to zero eventually right down on Cincinnati. And I'm not going to go through the methodology. I fear maybe I would glaze your eyes. But you can look on the website and look up our methodology if you want to. But you're not totally off the hook for methodology. I have to tell you some background information and definitions. The data that I'm going to show you ultimately comes from the American Community Survey, which is a very, very large survey conducted every year by the Census Bureau. And the questionnaire in the survey, some of you might remember in the 2000 census, there was what was called the long form, and it was filled out by 1/6 of the population. Really long, many pages of questions. Well, that questionnaire is used in the American Community Survey. So we get all that detail every year from the American Community Survey. And it's very complicated what we did, but essentially what it comes down to is we figured out methods we were able to figure out the legal status of every non-citizen that responded to the survey. The information is totally confidential. We don't have the names of anybody. No one can ever be traced. Okay, that was one of our cardinal rules. And because it has such a long questionnaire, you get a lot of information from whatever estimates you make. The other one definition I want to give you is, and I'm guessing most people have never heard of the word, it's not a word, puma. I'll be talking about pumas. They are geographic areas of the U.S. designated by the Census Bureau, and the characteristics of a puma, oh, I gotta stop doing that, are that 100,000 or more population lives in each puma. So in the U.S., there are a total of about 2,300 pumas, and they're geographic areas, and you'll know what I mean if I ever get to it. And finally, what I'm going to show you is survey data, and therefore it has sampling variability. And when we get down to small geographic areas, right around here, if there's an estimate, for example, of 1,000, what that means is about 100 people. 1,000, it means 10 people were interviewed for that. So when you get down to small numbers, be careful with the sampling variation. So we have a website, which is now on the screen. And I'm going to see if I can't keep from messing all this up. And we'll just go through. Basically, what I'm going to do is just go through the website and show you what's there. My original idea was to actually have this live and just be showing you things right from the computer. But I remembered when I first got my first iPhone, I didn't know how to operate it, and someone took it and they said, "Oh, you do this and this." And I didn't have any idea how to do it, so I decided not to do it that way. I have these slides organized, and we're going to go through them, and I'm going to tell you about them. And when I finish, hopefully you'll be able to do this yourself. So you see in the upper left-hand corner is the web address, data.msn. I want to say MSNBC, but we're cmsny.org. You can see what program I watch. Anyway, there's the website. The only thing I ask of you at this point is don't take out your phones and start putting this in there. I've lost audiences that way. So what we see on this slide is in the upper left, you see it says State Tool. Hope you can see that. And it's in blue, blocked in blue. And then beside it's Puma Tool. So we have data for states and for Pumas. And we also have unauthorized and eligible to naturalize. We're going to go through eligible to naturalize here first. And I'm going to show you what kind of data you can get by going to this website. So when you go to the website, you'll see a map of the U.S. that's blank. Now, if you don't click on any state, you'll get the total number for the U.S., which down at the bottom is 8.4 million. So don't click on any states, you'll get the total. If you click on Ohio, it'll give you the total. Or you can hold your cursor down and you can highlight 3 or 4 states and it'll give you the total. If you want the number along the southwest border, you just highlight those 4 states and it adds it up for you. One other thing before we leave this slide. In the lower right-hand corner, you'll see, I don't know if you can see it, but it says Excel and Word. Everything I'm telling you about today can be downloaded to an Excel file or a Word file. Now, what I've done in setting this up, I've clicked on Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. And as I said, what it shows you is that there were 179,000 people eligible to naturalize in those 3 states. So that's a good start. We're getting closer to home here, but we're going to keep going. And now we're going to shift over on the next slide to what we call the Puma tool. And so this part of the website gives you estimates for each Puma. As I said, there are about 2,300 Pumas in the country, and here's how you find information for your area. Where it says find a local area, you just start to type what you're looking for in that box, like CIN, for example. And what pops up is a box that gives you choices of all the places that are in the computer that start with CIN. And you see the first one's the entire metro area, and the second one is the city of Cincinnati. So you click on one of those, and the choice I've clicked on, is just the city. The second choice, Cincinnati. And when you do that, the map jumps right into the Pumas. It shows you the outlines of the Pumas, and you can recognize that as being in the southwest corner of Ohio. It's the city of Cincinnati. And you look down at the bottom and you'll see there are 7,600 people eligible to naturalize in the city. I happen to know that there are 14,000 in the whole area. So I want to show you that you can add, if you choose something like this, you can add Pumas just by highlighting them. And so in the next slide, I have added three pumas in Butler County, the western part of Warren County, and the western part of Hamilton County. So now we have a bigger area. And you see down below, there are 11,000. So now we've got enough sample size here, enough estimate to start looking at the characteristics of the population. So now we've selected an area. Now we're going to go down the website, and I'm going to show you the kinds of information that you can get. And don't forget, anything you see here can be downloaded. In terms of continent of origin, you'll see out of the 11,000 eligible to naturalize here, the largest number is from Asia. The second largest is Europe, and then Africa, and then North America. The little stars that are beside some of the areas mean that we've suppressed information below 1,000. And as a result of that, there aren't any, the next slide would be countries of origin, but there aren't any that have 1,000 or more, so they're not shown. Ooh, next, the next slide, I forgot to, is the language spoken at home. And you see, English is the number one, 3,600. Dravidian is the second language, a language of southern India and that area. And Spanish is third. So that's language spoken at home. But let's look and see how well everybody speaks English. That's the next slide. So we see that about 80%, adding together the two percentages on the right side, about 80% speak English well or only English. 8% speak a little English, and a significant number, about 12,000, I'm sorry, I got carried away there, 12% don't speak English. And you might say, well, if they don't speak English, they're not eligible to naturalize. We left them in anyway because they can learn English, and then they would be eligible to naturalize. And we thought it'd be important to know that number, so we've left them in these estimates. Looking down below, you have school enrollment data. About 20% are enrolled in school, and this brings up another subject. We've included children in these estimates because if their parents become U.S. citizens, they automatically become U.S. citizens. So we've left the children in the estimates. I may run a couple of minutes over, but I want to stop and tell you about an experience. When I worked at the Immigration Service 25 years ago, the INS and DHS now, they don't collect information on the children when the parents become citizens, the derivative citizenship of the children. So I was the head of the statistics division, and I decided, we really need that information. And we went to the trouble, we worked out a form, and we set it all up, and we got it through OMB, we got it approved and sent it out to the field. And then some time went by, and we got almost no responses from all these field offices and all the places where they're supposed to enter the information. And we checked, and we went to whoever we had to go to, and the word came back, they don't want to do it. So they still don't. They don't collect information on derivative citizenship. That's my whining part of the program there. I'm almost over it. We have marital status, and not only marital status, but the legal status of the person that they're married to is on here. Gender, about half of them are male and female. Access, I'm sorry. Okay, now we're on the right one. Gender, about half are male, female. 91% of them have access to the computer or the internet. In terms of poverty status, 81% of the households are at or above the poverty level in this local area that we're talking about here. We have employment status, and I don't know if you can see it, but only 2.6% are unemployed, which is about probably half of the rate at this time. These were 2015 estimates. We have 6 categories of occupations. We have whether or not they have insurance coverage. 92% have insurance coverage. That's higher than the national average. And then we have race by ethnicity, where you can see Hispanic, non-Hispanic. And okay. So the next slide shows all of these are all of the characteristics that you can get on the website. And I'm not going to read these or go through them, but you can probably get a copy of this presentation. Now, and I'm going to stop here very soon, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about undocumented immigrants. And if you look, we only have estimates now on the web for state information for undocumented immigrants. We had information by Puma, but we decided, let's say sometime in early 2017, that there might be some danger of using Puma data for undocumented immigrants to organize enforcement activities. So we took it off the web. But you can get information by state. So for Ohio, for example, there are about 86,000. It surprised me that Ohio has fewer than Indiana. Indiana has about 20,000 more than that. And again, if you highlight all 3 states, you get a total, which is 230,000. And that is about 2% of the total U.S. undocumented population. So I think with that, I'll just stop, and later I'll answer questions.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank CMS for organizing this whole of community response meeting. I think it is a fact that there's no one entity or no one type of entity that can do what needs to be done to work with the immigrant population and protect our communities. So what I wanted to start off with really quickly is just a little bit of a litany of some of the anti-immigrant and anti-refugee activities that have taken place since this administration has come in, because I think there's nothing more powerful for making the case for screenings than that, but I will be very fast on that because I know you already know this. These are actions that have begun from day one of the administration, starting with harming the most vulnerable immigrants. We've seen the refugee or Muslim ban. Dismantling our immigration system piece by piece is a goal of this administration, and it continues to this day. And we've seen attacks on other vulnerable populations, including threats to asylum, protections for unaccompanied minors, termination of temporary protected status, and DACA. At the same time, the administration is limiting and reducing due process through the immigration court system. The end of prosecutorial discretion means that all undocumented people are at risk. And as we're going to hear about shortly, we're seeing increases in workplace enforcement, targeted enforcement in pro-immigrant communities, and arrests of people at immigration agencies where they are seeking immigration status. There have been calls to eviscerate legal immigration to the United States, decimate family-based immigration, and end the diversity visa lottery. We've repeatedly heard language vilifying immigrants and refugees, the legal representatives who serve them, and the cities that welcome them. We're seeing administrative policy changes to discourage people from applying for benefits for which they are eligible, legal immigration benefits. And then, of course, recently everyone's attention has been on the southern border, where we are seeing people being prevented from applying for asylum and separating thousands of family members. And so the solution, when the outcry became so high, was to detain families, irrespective of the fact that even very short terms in detention facilities is damaging to children and, of course, damaging to their families. So national organizations, local organizations, and individuals have really stepped up in the immigration sphere, and that's been like such a positive thing to see. But the fact of the matter is we've been forced into a very reactive stance. And so what I'd like to say is I think the screening is an option for us to be proactive. It is something that we can do. And so I just want to give you some information about how we came to the conclusion, as Don said, that there is a significant number of people who are undocumented who are eligible for legal immigration status. So long-term, based on discussions with affiliates, based on our clinic's own staff experience serving immigrants, we have long believed that a significant number of undocumented people are eligible for status and simply don't know it or have not had the opportunity to apply. So we decided to test the theory. Working with CMS and the National Immigrant Justice Center back in 2014, we tested that theory on DACA recipients or applicants. And so we wanted to know what that number would be with the general population. With some support, Clinic was able to fund affiliates who conducted more than 4,000 screenings of people from 12 states around the 12 states. They came from all over the world. Tom Wong, who's a professor at University of California in San Diego, analyzed the data that we provided to them and found that 18.5% of the undocumented population is potentially eligible for legal status. We were looking at both affirmative and defensive remedies. So what that means, defensive is when people are in removal proceedings, and a significant percentage of the eligibility would take place in removal proceedings. So that's something to consider when thinking about the types of legal services that we need to work with this population. This is legal status that leads to permanent residence and ultimately citizenship. And in fact, our affiliates in doing these screenings came across more than 30 people who they believe are US citizens and just didn't know it. 18.5% of the population is approximately 2 million. Bob sitting here could probably give you a very precise number on that. Looking at Bob's numbers from Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky, you're talking about 42,000 people, or more than 42,000 people. And the beauty of this, as I said, is that we don't need Congress to do anything, which is good, because I think it's highly unlikely Congress will do anything, and we don't need the administration to do anything. There are some caveats that I just want to be very clear about. This study talks about potential eligibility. These were screenings, and they were one-on-one, but they were not full-on consultations, bring me your documents, let's explore your case further. So in order to know for sure, what you would want is an attorney or a Department of Justice accredited representative to do a deeper analysis of a case. And as I mentioned when I gave that quick list of some of the negative things that have been happening, the administration is implementing policies day by day that limit people's eligibility for particular immigration programs. A recent example is the matter of AB that came out, which is really limiting access to asylum, particularly for people from Central America. There may also be changes in state law that could negatively impact some of these legal options. In particular, special immigrant juvenile status is a form of relief that requires it's a state component as well as the federal immigration component. So we need a lot of advocacy to make sure that we can protect these legal options that are currently available. But I think what it also means is that we can't tarry. We need to move forward. While these options are available, we need to be screening people to find out if they're eligible. Another caveat, I think the high cost of filing fees, backlogs, numerical limitations, and lack of access to attorneys or legal representatives can also impact people's access to benefits. And there's a lot we can do to limit some of those factors. So I want to back up and give you a little bit of information about what the screening entailed. And many of you do this type of work or even do screenings, so it will sound familiar. Some of the components of the screening, and this really will show you how the whole community needs to be involved and can be involved. In order to encourage people to come in for the screening, a broad general audience, we asked our affiliates to also conduct Know Your Rights presentations. We didn't want people to self-select out and say, I don't think I'm eligible for anything, therefore I'm not going to go for a screening. We wanted anyone and everyone to come in. The other important factor here, though, is, as I said, 18.5% of people are potentially eligible, which means more than 80% of people are not, right, at this moment. And we wanted everyone to leave the screening with valuable information. Everyone does have rights in the United States, and they can't claim them if they don't know what they are. So that is an extremely important component. Providing referrals for legal assistance, because of course the screening is just the first step. And so many of the agencies will provide the legal services themselves, and many also gave referrals to other nonprofits or to low-cost attorneys in their communities. When it is possible, it's also really helpful to have a component, whether it's a presentation or resources for emergency planning. People should be considering what will I do if I'm detained or if I'm deported? If I have children, regardless of their status, am I taking them with me? Am I leaving them here? If I'm taking them, do they have passports? Do they have school records? Do they have the documents they need? If I'm leaving them here, do I have guardianship? And again, that's a state-by-state laws that will impact. Clinic has resources on that, as do other organizations, and so people would want to have those resources available even if they can't do kind of full-on presentations. I would also say it's a really good opportunity when you have people coming in for screenings to talk about notario fraud or the people who will take advantage of people. And again, there are resources that can kind of either passively be available for people to pick up or actively be shared. And then in your communities, you know what resources people may benefit from. And they don't have to be immigration related, but you have people coming in for services. So it's a great opportunity to share the many things that your community can offer. I would say the other benefit of the screenings is that it's kind of like a checkup for people. Some of our affiliates ask their clients to come in periodically for these checkups so that they can see if things have changed, whether it's marital status or moving or criminal issues. There are certain forms of relief, as I said earlier, that are only available in removal proceedings. We want people to know about those options so that if they are apprehended, they won't give in and just accept deportation, right? They will find an attorney, and hopefully in the meantime, they have been saving some money, gathering documents that will build a strong case. The other thing that's really important to consider is that people can move in and out of eligibility, and you want to share that information with anyone who comes in. So if I'm not eligible for anything right now and I walk out this door and I get assaulted, I may become eligible for a U visa, which is for victims of crime. If, on the other hand, I walk out and assault somebody else, I might have been eligible, but now because of my own criminal history, I may not. One of the forms of relief that I mentioned, this non-LPR cancellation of removal, is available only in removal proceedings. It requires that you have been here at least 10 years, and we're talking more than half of the population is undocumented. It also requires that you have family members, U.S. citizen or LPR, who will suffer exceptional and extremely unusual hardship. That's something else you can see. Maybe my family is perfectly healthy and everything is great now, and then some kind of a medical emergency, an accident or something happens, and suddenly someone moves into eligibility. So these are just some factors that we want the immigrant community to be aware of. So what would a whole of community response look like? And again, I'm speaking to people who do this and know this. I think I'd want to highlight that different communities have different strengths and resources and different immigrant populations, and I think that calls for different approaches, and so an assessment would be really valuable. As Melissa said, it's not sufficient really to just invite people to come, and using the information from CMS, I think one could look at the data and say, well, we get large numbers of a population from X country or X language group, but now we see that there are all these people speaking a different language or different characteristics. Why aren't they coming in our door? Are they going somewhere else, or is no one reaching them? So those are things to consider. Highlighting that, I think CMS is a great resource, Welcoming America as well. I think look for your national partners too, because they want to be partners in this community work as well. We have resources and can create resources if we don't have them, so that everyone around the country is not creating taking time to create the same thing. You have very important things to be doing here on the ground. So to conduct a legal workshop or screening, you need space, and this is a great opportunity to reach out to libraries, church, temple, mosque, community centers, consulates, schools, unions. Actually, we've done a lot of work with unions as well. You need volunteers. We can come from all of those same places. You need maybe a little bit of food, and so maybe some of the non-nonprofit sector can help you out there. You need individuals and organizations that can conduct community education and outreach. You're going to need legal staff, and if you're in communities that have pro bono attorneys or low-cost attorneys, and again, it may be immigration-related, but also some family law-related, you would want to reach out to them as well. Local governments, and I'll say consulates again, just because I think you cannot overstate the value of the consulates. Some of the consulates have financial resources so they can help pay application fees, and many of them are very eager to help and work and can offer space, can post flyers. They're a trusted resource, as many of you are, and so I think you should take advantage and use them. And then again, as I said, you may want to serve holistic needs of people who are walking in the door, whether it's social service programs, ESL classes, or other services that you provide. So I'm just here to say I would love to see a comprehensive nationwide screening program, because I think that's what we need. We have been fortunate to get started. The Mexican government funded clinic to in turn fund affiliates around the country to screen 15,000 people, Mexican nationals, between now and December 31st. We're hoping the funding will continue, and we'll continue to try to seek funding for more. But it doesn't have to be national. It's just if everybody around the country could be doing screenings of all different populations, I think piece by piece we're going to be able to protect the immigrant community. So thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Jessica Garcia. I am with the Retail Wholesale Department Store Union, also known as RWDSU, and we are part of UFCW, the United Food and Commercial Workers. We represent close to 100,000 workers who work in retail, poultry plants, meat packing plants, distribution centers, warehousing. We're an amalgamated union that came together by combining different unions throughout our history. And I am here, I'm actually from New York, but I'm here, as I've been telling some folks, because we had the misfortune of having ICE visit one of our meat packing plants and had 146 of our workers detained, and we still have a good portion of them still detained. And so in many ways, I'm here to share a case study of us, of a regional response, and to share how we've been able to work with groups on the ground, with some of you, in fact, who have been able to help us, and to emphasize the importance of this collaborative work, and to urge you to think of labor, think of unions as allies as you do your work as well, because we need you, and I think that we also could be of help to you. In basic things like resources, but if we can find a collaborative way of collaborating, there's just different ways for us to do that. So, case study. Before last month, our immigration work focused heavily on national advocacy. I'm in the political department, so working with UFCW to lobby our legislature, our Congress up, in DC, to advance progressive immigration reform and to put a stop to things like expanding guest worker visa programs, which are actually not good for workers, and advancing, figuring out a path for TPS holders, advancing basic things like DACA, or expanding DACA to give people a path to citizenship. And we were also doing Know Your Rights trainings for our members. Since the Trump election, preparing folks for what that could be a knock on their door if ICE comes to knock on their door, and what to do, having emergency plans. We also have a really good program that's funded through the UFCW, where we have immigration clinics to help people change status if that's something that they want to do. And so urging our members to go ahead and do that. And we have scholarships available for them if they can't afford all the fees. So that was our work before, and then we got raided in June. Our Salem plant was raided, and there's two other plants that the company owns in Ohio that were also searched. They had search warrants, and so documents were taken, and we expect those plants to be potentially raided in the near future based on what they find. And so when that happened, we were, it was a very difficult time for us. I don't know if you know labor, but, our headquarters are in New York. We have the Ohio locals are part of our Mid-South Council, which is based out of Alabama. They are repped by individuals who are traveling many, many states all the time, and so they may not be here in Salem. We have shop stewards, but they were also caught in the middle of the raid. And if you read about the raid, it was a military assault. It was ICE agents with automatic rifles, automatic pistols, helicopters flying up above. And very, very frightening for the workforce. There were 850 workers who were employed in that plant. About half of them are immigrants, and as we know, 146 of them were found to have reasonable reason for them to be taken. Not everybody was undocumented. Some folks just didn't have their documents on them, and so. So it was really scary. We had the very good fortune of having St. Paul's Church in the community. I don't know if Sister Renee Weeks is here, but she was really helpful in those initial stages in providing a safe place where families could go. We quickly flew in attorneys from New York and from DC, immigration attorneys, and she also helped us connect with local legal help to conduct those really important screenings and encouraging families to come in and let us know more about their situation so that we could figure out a way of helping them. So in addition to basic things, like now we have no one who's earning an income to pay our rent or to buy food, being able to figure out what their status actually was. Another big dilemma that we had is, as a union, we don't ask people's statuses. There's a lot of talk about unions being anti-immigrant, and there are some of us in our movement who are, but when it comes to organizing, that's not a question we ask. Everybody's a worker. Everybody deserves dignity in the workplace, and if that's part of a fight that they want to have to make sure that they have good wages and benefits and just reasonable work hours, everyone's welcome. And so we don't question people's statuses or what they report to the employer. And what we found is that people were working with different names, which is reasonable. People do that, and so even figuring out who they were, so then we could figure out where they were and how to help them was a challenge that we had. So working locally to be able to meet the families in a safe place was really important. Working with the consulates, with the Guatemalan and the Mexican consulate, they were instrumental in actually getting the list from the detention centers and the county jails to figure out who the individuals actually were. We tried to get those names from the company, but the company had the other names, the assumed names. And so as helpful as the company was at the time and still is, there were limitations to that. So working with the consulates, and then America's Voice Ohio reached out, and they started mobilizing and getting different mostly legal aid together, coordinating that. And they continue to have regular phone calls to coordinate that work. And so and ABLE was another big group in Cleveland who continues to support our workers. And so, long story short, we're at a place where, thanks to the really good work from the local groups, we've been able to connect with all families, given our limited capacity and limited reach within the state. But even beyond that, be able to truly support our families. Right now, we still face the challenge of making sure that everybody has legal representation. So you can easily find a pro bono attorney to perhaps do that initial, check-in or screening. But then, if a case needs to go long term, making sure that this is actually help that our workers can afford. We're also finding that, as others have indicated, that our members have made families here, so they have children who are U.S. citizens, but they may not have proper documentation. And figuring out if both parents are detained, or even if one parent is detained, figuring out how to get them U.S. passports so they have mobility and they can do whatever they need to do, whether they need to leave the country or just be mobile in the U.S., making sure that everybody has proper documentation. And then for those who actually are eligible to change status, being able to support them as they do that. So there's still a lot of need, and that's actually one of our main challenges now, just making sure that we get that legal support to everybody who's affected. And so I know that America's Voice Ohio has been working closely with allies here in Ohio. I know that they have they're looking to do the Akron Law School is holding a clinic later in August to see if lawyers would like to be able to support this work. And so if you know lawyers who want to get more involved and support this kind of work, there's going to be that legal clinic, and I can give you the date. I think I wrote it down. I don't have it in front of me, but I can give it to you. There's going to be that legal clinic, so folks have the basics of what immigration law and how you really support families in this work. So that's one of the pitches that I have for you. And then just so you know, the other things that we're doing, we're still collecting funds for the families. We ourselves are also getting labor to contribute to support the organizations that are helping us, because we know that a lot of resources are going into this work, and it's add-on work. Everybody's doing a lot of good work, but it's add-on work, and we recognize that. So getting additional supports for the organizations that are helping us, and then getting private donations to support to additionally support the families is a big priority. And our current fund has been able to lend a lot of support to families in terms of paying rent and buying food and all that, but that's not enough. And then just in terms of the company, I think something for all of you also to think about, when we think about whole communities, we have community groups, we have labor, and then the employers are also part of the community, and we are working with them also to contribute funds. But one of the big things for us is just making sure that the workers who were affected, that they actually get paid what they're owed, and that they get paid out what they're owed if they choose to leave, and if they're not able to return to work. So they have vacation days, they have sick days, they have a lot of things that they could just disappear and not get paid. But the company's actually been amazing, and I don't know if I mentioned the company. It's Freshmark. They've been amazing in making sure that everybody's wages get honored, and they're also looking to do additional work. So it's a case study of what we can do together. And I will just say that services are important, and they're critical, they're integral, they're emergency things that we need to make sure that we do. But if we really want to not have to respond in this way, advocacy and being active is critical. We can't just do these things in silos and operate only locally. We need to think big. And so as you're doing this good work, I think somebody had the amazing, pitch being able to lift up stories through social media, and bring those stories up to the decision makers. That's such a critical thing, and that's something that we're, those of us who are doing work in DC and doing work with our Congress folks, they're always looking for those tangible stories and people that impacted, and being where you are. In Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, critical states politically, the voices that you lift up here are very influential, and can go a long way to convince decision makers that the system that we currently have is really not working, and we need to think more humanely about the people who live in our country.
So I think we have time for questions and exchange. So if you have a question about any of these ideas, programs, just as people come up, it strikes me that kind of the four big things are getting your community on a path to certification as a welcoming community, naturalizing those who can be naturalized, and also getting to know who's in your particular community in the kind of fine-tuned way that Bob was talking about. Putting people that could be put on a path to legal status, actually on a path to legal status, and taking them outside the kind of framework and vulnerability of potential enforcement by ICE. And then the importance of partnerships, of course, in addressing, in the aftermath of worksite raids and other kind of situations, and more importantly, advocacy and planning in anticipation of those types of situations. Please. And if you could identify yourselves too.
Hi, I'm Kelly Davis. I work for Catholic Charities in the Diocese of Cleveland. And my question was for Robert. And it was that Puma data that's not on the website about the undocumented, is there any way of getting a hold of that so that we can use some of that information in the advocacy work that we do?
The official answer is no.
Officially.
We actually have not been sharing that with anybody since last year. I'm sorry.
I mean, yeah, but that's the official answer, so see us afterwards. Yeah. What we haven't been sharing is the underlying micro data, but the general, 21 categories of information on undocumented, we do provide to people that are sympathetic and are going to use it for good purposes.
Right, and I would also add that, for example, if you needed data for the entire area of Cincinnati, for example, I think we'd provide that because that can't be twisted into any enforcement use if you have the whole area. Yeah, so get in touch with Rachel.
Other questions? Any comments? Any models that people would like to share? Yep, go. Yeah.
I'd like to add one thing to Jean's presentation. She mentioned that the study that showed there were 18.5% of undocumented residents who might be eligible to adjust. We've actually, over the last few weeks, we've actually looked at the data for 2016, and our results are almost identical to that. We find that out of 11 million undocumented immigrants, we looked at we looked at in the households of every single one of them to see who they were married to, whether or not they had an adult U.S. citizen child, and whether they had a U.S. sibling, U.S. citizen sibling, or married to an LPR. It turns out that just over 18% of the 11 million they have a relative who can petition for them to become a legal resident. And the total is about 2 million, which is just over 18%. But that's only the people who lived in the households. It could be that we don't know how many have, for example, a U.S. citizen child who's 27 years old, who no longer lives in the household. So the 18.5% or the 2 million number that we're looking at is the minimum number. So I just want to reinforce that idea that it's important to screen and to find out whether or not they might have someone who can petition for them.
We should tell you too that Bob has put together a similar kind of data and estimates on refugees, and we did a population a report 2 weeks ago that came out on refugees that forever should put a stake into the argument that refugees are not contributing and that they're anything less than an inspiring success story in the United States. We looked at refugees from 1987 through 2016, 1.1 million refugees, and they did extraordinarily well, better than the total U.S. population after a period of time. Yep.
Hi. This message is, I'm Katina Cummings from Louisville, Kentucky. This message this question is both for Jean and Jessica. You both mentioned Know Your Rights trainings, and I have two questions in response to that. One is, what have you found as the best or better delivery models? Do you use train-the-trainer approaches? How do you get community members involved to do those trainings? And secondly, have any employers allowed you to do them at the work sites?
I'll take a step first. So our trainings have been conducted mostly in-house, but the curriculum was developed with community group input, and they do have train the trainers, and they do have the community leaders who are helping them develop those. So the methodology varies by depending on who's doing the training. We have been most effective of not in the work site, but rather bringing out the reps and then having the reps do it with the members when they meet for meetings. Yeah, it's not always easy to get into the site, and it really depends on the contract. So it's not consistent, and because we represent so many different industries, the contracts look very different. So that's not always helpful, although it would be the most effective. And one of the things that I'm personally trying to push our folks to do is to push employers to allow trainings to happen not just to the immigrant workforce, but rather the whole workforce, because there's still a lot of racism in the workplace, and we need to dismantle that. And if we can't have these kind of conversations, even though they're going to be very difficult conversations, but if we can't start having these conversations in the workplace where folks are supposed to work together and be able to get along and understand each other, then it's going to take us a long time to get there.
And I would just say it's important to use various models. I think some communities are less comfortable coming out and sitting in a presentation that's a Know Your Rights presentation. They're not going to do that. And so Clinic, for example, has materials on Know Your Rights in 9 different languages, and those could be left and someone can pick them up and walk out with them. And in other communities, it is great to have, and you can get volunteers who are capable. The important things to really get out there, number one, just don't open the door. I mean, these presentations and the information is great, except when someone is faced with an officer who's very, aggressive and loud and whatever, people often don't remember everything they've been told. I would say that, and the little cards, within Clinic's packet is a cutout one, and it's orange and white. And a lot of people know the red card from Immigrant Legal Resource Center. It just gives someone something that they can hand to someone, because it's in English and other languages, and empowers them a little bit. So I would try any of those models. I would say that the National Immigration Forum does quite a bit of work trying to get employers to do citizenship workshops on site and allow time for that. And so I think it's a great model to reach out to employers, and maybe starting with some that are already open to that might be good. But if not, I think create those relationships and make them be open to it. It's in their best interest.
And I will just add, sometimes making that ask from the community perspective is the employer is more willing to do that because it's a good community relations building kind of activity versus the union, which is sometimes more, the relationship can be more antagonistic depending on the shop.
We do have equitable access to justice. Thank you. We do have equitable access to justice services, as well as a number of other components related specifically to that in the standard. So thank you.
Okay, any final comments from the panelists? Everybody is tired after lunch, aren't they? And getting ready for the breakout sessions. So Rachel, do you want the breakout session they start at 2:45, is that right?
Yes, so actually you all get a break again right now. And we're gonna throw up a slide in a minute that'll show you, but mobilizing in Ohio remains in this room. Mobilizing in Indiana is going to be in conference room 1, which is located a floor above. It's actually called level 4, but it's just the floor that you entered into. And then mobilizing in Kentucky is in conference room 2, also on that floor, level 4, just right above us. Okay, thanks all.
And thank you to the panelists too.